Welcome to I Want to Work There, a podcast that helps colleges and universities boost their brands as employers of choice. I'm your host, Eddie Francis, brand strategy consultant for Edify Ventures. Join me every other week for discussions with some of the best minds in talent recruitment and retention, human resources, and marketing and communications inside and outside of higher education. I Want to Work There is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals just like you grow, and explore our other shows at enrollify.org, or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Joining me on I Want to Work There is Ludmila Praslova. She is a professor and an author. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. How are you?
I'm grateful to be here, and thank you for having me. I love talking about neurodiversity.
Tell us about what it is that you do, because you have a very, very interesting resume, but tell us about what it is that you do right now.
I'm a professor of industrial organizational psychology at Vanguard University of Southern California. I've been doing this for a pretty long while, and my emphasis within industrial organizational psychology has always been some kind of diversity. I started my career in global diversity, and I worked in a multicultural organization, which was wonderful on the level of national level cultures. We all knew a little bit of all the different languages. It was great fun. But as far as gender inclusion, that wasn't very good. It made me think that why organizations could be inclusive in some ways, but not in other ways. So that actually led me to going into a PhD program in industrial organizational psychology, because I wanted to figure out how to create systems that are inclusive of every aspect of who we are, not just national culture, but also gender and, race. And now I'm working with neurodiversity. So after many years of looking at all the different aspects of what is missing in inclusion in the workplace, I eventually realized two things: that I was autistic, and I realized that after running into just some stressful situations, politics, cold office, kind of several things happened at the same time, and I just wasn't coping the way I would expect from myself. As someone who's been very successful in my career, and I was very angry with myself because I couldn't do it.
Oh, man.
And I was blaming all kinds of other things. I was thinking maybe because I'm a working class academic, I just don't understand politics. But it felt like it was more than just upbringing. Because yes, I come from collectivist upbringing, and I'm working class. I'm not used to, claiming credit and politicking.
Yeah.
But it felt like it was more than that. It was like my actual body was struggling. My actual brain wiring was struggling with what I had to do in that particular time in the organizational situation. And so that led me to eventually kind of self-identify as autistic, and then officially get a diagnosis. That really opened my eyes to how non-inclusive most organizations are of various forms of neurodivergence. And also, autistic people with college degrees have 85% unemployment rate. So I thought, if it's awful, right? So if we can solve that huge problem, I'm sure it will remove barriers that are tripping up many other people in the workplace. Because again, for me, it was like, is it me? Is it my class background? Is it my cultural background?
Yeah.
What is it? So the same things like the lack of transparency and excessive politics, for example, would trip up an autistic person and a first generation academic and many other people who come from backgrounds who are not necessarily culturally exposed or trained to function in that kind of environment. So I decided to kind of focus on neurodiversity piece in addition to all the other diversity pieces I've been focusing on my entire life. And it was like the last thing that I needed to complete it, starting from global level, national level cultures, and then looking at, gender and class, and just adding the psychological level difference really brought it home to how we can create organizations that are not tripping people up for no reason and just being so counterproductive, like not having transparency or not having valid measurement for selection and for promotion. So all of this came together. And so the last, 5 years, I've been doing a lot of writing. I was the first person to write from an autistic perspective from Harvard Business Review. I think it's a fun fact.
Oh, wow.
I did a lot of writing and speaking, training in organizations on neurodiversity inclusion. So in the last year, I've been working on this book that's coming out in May. It's called The Canary Code, a guide to neurodiversity and intersectional inclusion and dignity in the workplace. It's been about 5 years of research just for that book, even though my entire life experience also went into it. So I've been busy. Very long answer to what I do.
No problem. And listen, the way I even learned about you was a fascinating piece that you wrote for Fast Company, why employers need to change how they onboard neurodivergent workers. And I'll tell you what really got me, Ludmila, was the first line of the commentary. And it reads, "If I were just autistic or broke, I would have been fine, but I was both. So I was starting my new job sleep deprived." And the thing that I wonder, just in reading that first line, I wonder how many people identify with that. So describe the experience that you went through that prompted you to write that piece, because there are a lot of things that happened in that onboarding situation, or at least that introduction to where you were working at the time. So describe what happened that inspired that.
This article is actually excerpt from my book. It's an opening to my chapter on onboarding and training. I wanted to illustrate that we can't just think about training or onboarding or anything as a one size fits all. And we can't even think about it as, well, let's consider one angle on diversity. We have to think about those things intersectionally. So that's why if I were just autistic or just broke, I would have been fine. So this was my academic job right out of graduate school. I was actually still working on my dissertation. Everything sounded good until I found out that the onboarding is going to happen a couple of hours drive away from the town in the middle of the woods. You can only get there by car. It was before Ubers and Lyfts. And that was a problem because people don't usually expect that, professors don't have cars. In most places in the States. And autistic people tend to learn to drive late, and some people don't learn to drive, especially if they're also dyspraxic. And in my case, I also come from, working class, first generation college student background. So that was another reason I didn't learn to drive or had a car, because I didn't have the money for the car also. So this situation had two issues: transportation, and then it was in the kids' camp. We were supposed to, sleep on those bunk beds and bunch of new coworkers I've never met before in the same room. Well, as an autistic person, I have a huge problem with that. And just sleeping in one room with strangers, that just doesn't happen for me. And that was years before I was diagnosed. So I didn't know how to explain it. I asked nicely, do I really have to do it? Is there other option? And they basically said no. There was an option if we had a car, we could go to the nearby town and go to a hotel. That was kind of an interesting situation. If I were just autistic, but I had money, I would have been able to self accommodate by just staying elsewhere and paying extra to stay somewhere. But I didn't have the money. And if I wasn't autistic, I would have been a little bit more okay with the sleeping situation.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of a while. Then the next year, I did get a car, and I ended up sleeping in my car, which is kind of interesting, sleeping in a Corolla.
Oh, wow.
So because they did the same orientation, the same place every year. Uh, so it was kind of not a pleasant situation at the time, but otherwise it was a beautiful place. So for someone who has money and doesn't have issues
Hmm.
with having a bunch of strangers in the same room, it would have been a very pleasant, beautiful, natural place to be. Uh, but and then later on I went there just for my own enjoyment because it's a beautiful place. But that particular arrangement just wasn't working, and so it's an example of how disadvantages stack up and why we really need to think about onboarding or training or any kind of professional development from more than one perspective, because people have complex lives, complex backgrounds. Some people have trauma. Some people
Hmm.
have physical disabilities. And when all of that is just kind of brushed away and it's just, here's this experience and enjoy or whatever, it's excluding more people than organization probably realizes, because I'm sure they didn't realize that was a problem.
Yeah, and I wondered, did that have just that one experience, and to see that the to see that the orientation was set up the same way the next year, did that have any effect on you personally, or did it have any effect on the way that you viewed your new employer?
Yes, and again, I was kind of trying to fit in at the time and,
Yeah.
go with the program and just, try to enjoy it as much as I can. But it definitely impacted it. And I didn't know how to explain myself at the
Yeah.
time. I didn't speak the accommodations. Now I would have been very different, but I have 20 more years of experience.
Hmm.
And then I was really, really trying to please people because I'm also a people pleaser. But it definitely made it harder to feel included. And
Hmm.
again, I didn't know I was autistic. I was misdiagnosed with mood depression for most of my life.
Oh, wow.
Very
Okay.
typical for women. Uh, but in that particular environment, the class issue felt very strongly because I believe I was the
Mm.
only working class professor at that university. And that came up time and time and time and time again, because there were just certain expectations that people didn't realize people like me existed at all.
Hmm.
Now, where I am, we're almost 50% first generation academic university. It's a very unique place. Doesn't happen a lot. Usually it is a very small percentage. So that particular place was much more in line with most universities.
Hmm.
And so that was the intersectionality that I felt, and that's one that I was more aware of at the time. I felt like I didn't fit at the time because I
Yeah.
wasn't thinking in terms of the place is not fit for me. So I was thinking, well, something is wrong with me. It took me a while to figure out that the place actually just wasn't sufficiently inclusive of all kinds of people. So I was blaming myself for quite a while for not fitting in.
You're listening to I Want to Work There. I'm Eddie Francis, and we're talking to Ludmila Praslova. She is a professor of organizational psychology at Vanguard University of California. She's also the author of the book, The Canary Code, A Guide to Neurodiversity, Dignity, and Intersectional Belonging at Work. So when you have engaged with your employers or your colleagues, how have you engaged with them about your neurodivergence?
Well, right now I'm very out.
Mhm.
I'm out on social media. Obviously, I write about it. So most of my colleagues by now kind of know it, but that wasn't always the case. Again, um, for many years, I thought I just had this strange depression that didn't respond to
Mhm.
medications. And then I was finally diagnosed as autistic. That helped. Uh, but the disclosure has always been a very interesting situation. So for the most part, I just didn't disclose for much of my life, for
Mhm.
15 years, other than the last 5 years. So the previous 15 and the last 5 are kind of different. And when I finally there was a lot of stress, I disclosed to a boss. He was wonderful, very supportive.
Mhm.
And so for a while it was really nice, even though coworkers always just kind of wonder if you have any kind of more flexibility than someone else. But then academic job usually has a flexibility, so I didn't have too many issues because I worked myself into positions that kind of aligned with what I could do and what I'm good at. So
Mhm.
there had to be additional stressors, like extra work because someone is not there and you're picking up 2 jobs, or they add responsibilities that weren't initially in your contract, or something like that, when I would feel that I actually have issues that impact my work. Because otherwise, uh, you know teaching and researching is something that's very much in agreement with my brain. And there's the flexibility that's built into academic life was also what we call self-accommodation,
Mhm.
because I learned very early I can't do 9 to 5. I just space out. I can do 6 a.m. till midnight if I'm by myself in my house, but I can't just do the regular 9 to 5. So but academic life kind of took care of that. So, but
Mhm.
whenever I take administrative position or something changes, then I would feel it. And so sometimes I did have to disclose
Mhm.
when those kind of stressful events happen. And so I had one supportive boss, but in other situations, people would do things like from just kind of shrugging their shoulders and not knowing what to say, to laughing in my face. That was one
Mhm.
person's reaction.
Wow.
To gaslighting me into saying that I'm imagining I'm autistic. So there were very strange reactions. There also people try to weaponize it. So someone would know that I have high sensory sensitivity, specifically to noise, and they would say like, "Well, if you don't do X, Y, Z, I'm going to play loud music in my office next door."
Oh goodness.
That literally happened. Or someone found out I'm autistic, and the autistic people often have issues with interruptions. So this person just decided to barge into my office every 15 minutes.
Wow.
People sometimes don't have the best reactions, and especially if they like there's one or two people who know, and they just feel like, well, I can just use it for whatever my own reasons. And some people obviously have been wonderful and supportive and amazing. So what I found is that being completely open is better than being partially open with one or two people,
Mhm.
because it just kind of takes care of some of the nonsense that occasionally pops up, and just bad behavior that pops up when people know that you have, if you're autistic or
Mhm.
whatever, and they think like, okay, I'm the only one that knows and I can exploit it for
Mhm.
my own goals, which unfortunately happens. Again, this is over a very long career. So it's not like those things happen every day and people are horrible. But again, there have been multiple instances in, decades of career. And there have also been people who have been super supportive and wonderful and amazing.
Hey, it's Mallory. Exciting news! I'm hosting the Engage Summit in Raleigh on June 25th and 26th, and I'd love to meet you there. Together, we'll dive into the mind of the modern student, what fires them up, how they interact, and what they expect in today's digital age, and how tools like AI help put them in the driver's seat of their education. We have some terrific speakers, including our closing keynote, New York Times best-selling author Jeff Selingo. Sessions will dig into practical ideas and innovative strategies to get your team more student-centered and ready to adopt AI. And many of your favorite Enrollify hosts are presenting too, like Jamie Hunt, Jenny Lee Fowler, and Brian Gross. Use the discount code Enrollify50 for an extra $50 off your registration. Learn more and register at engage.element451.com. We can't wait to see you there.
Yeah. It's really interesting, your background and your knowledge base when it comes to this mixture of organizational psychology, human resources, and the work that you're doing right now, especially around diversity. It's interesting to hear you process how you have found a space where you have been able to fit the work that you do with the way that your brain works in a place that you feel accepted, it sounds like, at Vanguard. And so I think there's a very strong message there for self-advocacy. But then also, I think from the institutional side, I think there is also a really strong message for institutions to understand what kinds of places they are for people, and how, not necessarily how they can customize how they employ people, or how they can customize the talent experience, but be more intentional about the talent experience and how that looks for folks. So with that being said, one of the conversations that we have had in the marketing community is we have had a lot of conversations about DEI marketing and institutions marketing themselves as great places to work. You merge that with DEI. There's this active conversation about what happens when an institution decides to turn someone into a DEI poster child. This is something that's happened to a lot of friends of mine. Somebody very close to me was, I joked with her about this, but someone very close to me was at an event, and she was dancing, and she had a kente purse with her, and her head was wrapped, and she was at this predominantly white institution, and this photographer was kind of hiding and took a picture of her. And I joked with her and I said, hey, you're about to become the DEI poster child. Wouldn't you know it, about a week later, she wound up on a big hero image on this website because she was having a good time. But she was also one of the only Black people having a good time at the time. So when it comes to DEI marketing with institutions, especially when they want to market themselves as great places to work, have you experienced this, or have you spoken to any colleagues with diverse abilities who have experienced this? And what would be your feedback to institutions if this is the case, if this is something that you've experienced or you've had colleagues who've experienced it?
Yes. And within disability communities, stories like that always come, especially if it's a visible disability. You have the only wheelchair user,
exactly,
or the only little person, someone who is visibly different. The same thing happens. They want you for posters and
for pictures,
websites. And that definitely does happen. And some people guys like, okay, I'll represent, but for the most time, people do find it highly annoying and objectifying because they didn't sign up for being a token whatever. For autistic people, it's a little bit different because, some people think there's an autistic look, but there actually isn't. But
Hmm.
then it's a positioning of photos. So there's the issue. Some companies would say this, would put out those photos with kind of like the benevolent boss standing over an autistic person, like showing something to them. So it's even in the positioning, you still see the power
Yep.
differential.
Hmm.
And so there's definitely that. And again, many autistic people love writing and talking about themselves and getting out the message. But then someone would take the story and present it in a way that turns it into the inspiration porn, and nobody likes that. So, the person overcoming obstacles, and that's just not how we want to present ourselves. So, in my case, sometimes when I would write something for publication that's heavily edited, someone would try to tweak my voice or even tweak my story and add the pity points. And no. It's very interesting because the inspiration porn unfortunately sells.
Yeah.
And so sometimes within disability community, that is also an issue other than just physical photographs. With me, it would be tweaking my story to just get it at extra tear jerky, even though
Oh, yeah. Yep.
just
Hmm.
facts are pretty significant, but just don't tweak it to make it me into, something I'm not.
Is there a halfway point? The institution wants to say, hey, listen, we are definitely a DEI friendly place. But then at the same time, they actually go to the folks they want to feature and have a thoughtful conversation. Is that a compromise? Is that a good compromise for the institution wanting to put its message out there?
Being honest, I think, is always a good idea. And if you tell someone honestly that, yes, we want to feature diverse group of people on our website, and we're asking for your release, but you're totally afraid to say no again. It's hard because people and organizations have power differential, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's
Yeah.
hard to say no.
Hmm.
So I think they need to have a lot of psychological safety for people to be
Hmm.
able to say no in those situations, because sometimes this just becomes a pro forma exercise because they know that because of the power differential, they're going to say yes no matter what. But if an organization has been transparent and trustworthy to the point where people will feel that, yes, uh, they're not lying, they're not going to punish me if I say no, then this kind of honesty might be helpful. Yeah, other than, catching people somewhere. And I think you do need to get someone's release to put their photos somewhere anyway.
There are definitely measures that need to be put in place. And so so that is one, again, in the marketing community, is a conversation that we have. And one of the things that we always want to make sure that we do is we want to make sure that people um they have control of their own dignity, they have control of their image, they have agency over how they're represented, and that sort of thing. And so I'm really curious about what you see as the way forward. I always end interviews asking folks about this. What is a helpful first step that colleges and universities can take to ensure that their neurodivergent faculty and staff have a great work experience? What is something that you would like to see, or or Dr. Praslova, the president, would do? What would you take as that first step?
I have to do what I say in my book that people should do.
Hmm.
And the first principle of the Canary Code is participation. So
Hmm.
ask your own people. And every situation is different, every university is different. And first of all, you probably do have neurodivergent people. They're probably not disclosed for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
If they
Yeah.
are, then you know who you are. But try to, again, create as much safety through anonymous, let's say, survey, and try to find out what is bothering your people. For some people, it could be the lack of transparency in promotion. For some people, it's the lack of accessibility in physical environment. It's a campus that isn't aware of sensitivities and they're just blaring music 24/7 or whatever it is. Ask your people and then fix that. Then you get their trust, and then you'll say, okay, they actually mean it. You'll get a lot more support for whatever other steps, because usually it's pretty systemic. You need to address multiple parts of the system, but the low-hanging fruit is to ask your people what's preventing them from thriving and fix that thing. And usually it is something that is relatively fixable. And then you can just fix the entire talent cycle piece by piece and make organization as inclusive as possible. In some situations, you might need to start with your recruitment. In other situations, you might recruit from the most inclusive group of people, but your onboarding is going to leave people unwelcomed. So you need to pinpoint specifically in your situations where you have those inclusion barriers. I'm not a huge fan of off-the-shelf solutions for every organization. It's important to do your own inclusion and specifically neuroinclusion inventory assessment and go from there.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and the one more question is, I know you can't speak for all colleges and universities, but if you had to have, let's say, just one big microscope where you could take a look at the nation and look at the landscape of higher ed, would you say that higher ed has moved in a positive direction in terms of how it has accepted people of diverse abilities, if that is something that you have thoughts on?
I think it's done much better job with students than with staff and faculty. People have put a lot more thought into how we serve students and providing accommodations, but sometimes it actually can come at the expense of staff and faculty because they are expected to do more with the same or less and providing more services and emotional support for students, which is necessary. I think we should be doing that at the same time as we are not getting enough support. So I think higher education needs to look at what they do for students and think a little bit more about how maybe some of those things could be applied to staff and faculty, because I think there's a difference. And yes, many organizations say we serve clients or we serve students, depending on your industry and how you think about it. But the best organizations also know that you can't keep pouring from an empty cup. So you need to provide ways for staff and faculty to have the ability to pour into students.
Ludmila Praslova, she's a professor of organizational psychology at Vanguard University of California. She's also the author of The Canary Code, a guide to neurodiversity, dignity, and intersectional belonging at work. Ludmila, thank you so much for joining me on I Want to Work There.
Thank you, Ed. It's been so fun talking to you. Thank you for inviting me.
I Want to Work There is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Jamie Hunt, Mallory Wilsey, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbles, Jenny Lee Fowler, and so many other of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.